So, welcome, Luca. Thank you for being here and for our other participants. Basir, I'm hosting today, a small but mighty team. So, uh, Luca is a management advisor. He's actually the author of 9 books. And for the last 11 years, he has helped organizations improve their management capabilities. He does training, workshops, coaching, and advises. And he lives in Turin. How many know where Turin is? Do you know where it is, Dave? Turin, Italy. Oh,
Torino,
You're on mute.
regione
You're on mute.
piemontoso.
Yes, wow.
good.
Everyone seems to know about it. It never happened in my life that everyone in the call knows where Torino is. Yeah.
Welcome, Desiree.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Welcome. Over to you, Luca. We have a small group here today. Normally, if it was larger, we would break out into rooms, but let's see how the session goes. And we certainly could have one group and everyone just ask questions, and we can go from there. So over to you, Luca. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, of course, like interrupt anytime if you have any questions. The topic of today was about working remotely. And the reason why I feel very much so, first of all, like the reason why I feel the topic of work and management so important is because I see how determinant the quality of one's work, one's workplace, and one's boss is to their quality of life outside of work. Like I see plenty of people who have a bad day because the boss did something badly, or because their day at work was bad, and so on. And that's basically what basically brought me to do the work that I do now, which is to give people better bosses and better workplaces. And I feel remote work in particular, because the thing is, working in the office, it's something that we have been doing as a society for 50, 100 years plus. So we kind of got at least adequate at it. And instead, working remotely, we've been doing it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, some people even just 6 months. And so we are not good at it. And because we are not good at it, meetings are boring, projects get mishandled, delegation is unclear, all those things. And then you have a lot of problems downstream. People are less engaged, they don't get the support they need, they're less effective, and that causes a lot of problems. And this is why I feel quite passionate about the topic of remote work, because we just need to accept that there are a few things that we need to relearn as compared as office work. And if we have people that are working remotely, even if it's just a few days a week, like I know a lot of people that do like two or 3 days a week in the office and 2 or 3 days a week from home, there are a few things that we need to do differently if we want work from home to be engaging and effective. And this is basically why I find it such a big topic. And the thing is that I've been working remotely or hybrid since at least 2008. Like 2008 was the first remote work experience I had, like more like hybrid. And so I've been doing this quite a lot, both from the employee point of view, then from a manager point of view. Then nowadays I'm advising and training a lot on remote work. So I've kind of seen it from like all directions. And so today I just wanted to talk a little bit about this. And for me, like so I've said like things that need to be done differently. And for me, one of the things is just the importance of doing the important things over a video call rather than with an email, for example. Because one thing is when you are in the office, and for example, you're delegating a task to someone, and it's happening in person, you get to see the other person's reaction. You get to see whether they are confused, whether they are engaged, whether they are afraid, whether they're excited. And based on that, you can adapt. A bit like Tom was saying before, that one of the qualities of the leaders is to adapt to the situation. But adapting to the situation requires being able to read the other person's state. And you can only do it if you see them, if you get feedback from them. And for example, right now, I can see Tom, Rose, and Dave, and I can see their facial expression, and I can see whether they're nodding, and maybe I know that I can go faster, or I can see whether maybe they're frowning, and then I know that maybe I need to clarify something, and that makes me better at communicating. And this couldn't happen, for example, if it were a phone call. Well, with a phone call, if you know the other person very well, you can have some feedback from their tone of voice. But over an email, you get no feedback at all. And so the number one thing that I tell to people which are working remotely is if you're doing something important, and especially if you're delegating a task, which is important that the other person understands and gets on board, is to do it over a video call. Or if you're working remotely, you do it on the day, hybridly, you do it on the days in which they're in the office. Even better, of course. But so all the things which are important, you try to do them face to face or like over a video call. And you try to read the other person's. Sometimes people tell me like, oh, but if people have questions, they can ask it, they can send me an email with the questions. Guess what? It almost never happens. Even now, if I ask people if anyone had any questions, maybe there would be one person raising the hand, and yet probably there are at least half of the people that have at least one question. And this ratio is even worse on email. For every one question you get over email, there were 10 other questions that the person had. And the best way is to look at their facial expressions. Even better is to imagine that the other person misunderstood something and you just clarify. So for example, one of the things which is always at the back of my mind is I ask myself, let's imagine that my audience misunderstood me. What could be the most likely thing that they misunderstood? And in this case, it could be, for example, they might misunderstand that I'm saying that everything must be done over a video call. And then I answer this question, even if no one asked me. And so, for example, my answer is, you don't need to do everything via video call, because if you try to do that, it will take a lot of time and it will bring inefficiency. But usually delegations are the one thing, unless it's something routine that the other person has done over and over, and you know that they know how to do it and they know. Otherwise, delegation is the one thing that you need to do it over email. And when you do it, you imagine that you will be misunderstood, and you proactively answer the most likely ways in which you will be misunderstood. Does this make sense? Does anyone have any question? Oh, Tom has a question. So he wrote in the setting up a video call is an obstacle. Yes.
I just captured the thought. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I do agree that seeing the other person and having the conversation is great, but sometimes it's hard to get your schedules together and to grab a 5-minute or 15-minute call, right? So, I don't know. I'm just making that observation.
So I have a comment or question. And obviously this is my own experience, but the question, the thought process is whether or not the same issue to me would arise in the industry I'm in right now, if you're trying to have a conversation with someone. So I work in healthcare. We have hospitals, nursing homes, ambulatory centers, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the people that I work with are going to be someplace else. So if it's somebody that I'm trying to get some time with, let's say in the office I used to work in, because I work remotely now, the problem really still arises whether I'm in the office or working from home in trying to get some time with them, because I can't swing by their office and say, hey, can we talk any more in the office than I can if I work remotely? And one of the things that I've experienced is that even if I go back to the office, we will still be making phone calls. All of my meetings will still be on phone. Maybe my one-on-ones with my manager, the occasional, colleague meetup, that sort of thing may not be, but pretty much everything is a phone call because everybody that you're going to meet with is not in the same office with you. So I guess I don't necessarily look at a video call as an obstacle any more than I look at setting up a regular meeting as an obstacle. It's just another way to facilitate the connection with whoever you're trying to meet with. And if it's a one-on-one, look what you were mentioning before, you want to be able to see the expression. That's what the video call is for. And I can tell you, I'm not a fan of video calls. But if it's a one-on-one conversation that you're trying to have, to make sure that the other person understands whatever you're delegating to them or vice versa, then the video call is a lot easier than, let's say, my 50-person project call and everybody is on video.
Yeah, thank you, Tom and Desiree. I want to say that, like, there is a wall, like the determinant, so I will begin with what Tom said, that sometimes, like, you don't have the time. It's difficult to get a grab with someone on the video call and so on. This is true, but in my experience, there are cases in which the video call will happen either earlier or later when you discover that there was some mistakes that you that wasn't clarified and so on. And a lot depends on, like, what's the recent track record. So if you're dealing with someone who has a track record of getting what you need from them, of doing things well, doing them proactively, if they have a question, they will ask to you, then great. Then at this point, emails can be sufficient. If instead you get another person which has a track record of not asking questions until it's too late or until a mistake happens, or of not doing things to the level of quality that you would like them to do, at this point, I would be much more strongly inviting to have a phone call, even if it's hard to have it, because anyway, you will have to have it at some point. Then, of course, there are some situations in which you really can't, but I would just say try to have it more than you were doing it before. Then Tom said there is a hybrid method, which is like you craft a very good email in which you address all the possible misunderstandings. This is very good. It usually relies on you having done it before, so that you have a good idea of what the misunderstandings are or will be. So, for example, let's say that I don't know, but for example, let's say that Tom, you've been organizing a lot of these calls, and you work with a lot of moderators, and you've onboarded moderators a lot. Probably after a few onboardings, you kind of know what will be the common questions, what will be the common, let's say, mistakes that some moderators do on the first call, and so on. And at this point, yes, I totally agree. you can craft a very good email or even a PDF with like, I don't know, a shorthand guide or something like that. And that will work well. And that's because you got to see, for example, you have the past experience. If instead, for example, you're delegating a new thing that you've never delegated before, then I would insist a bit more like on trying to do it over a video call, or asking for like something which I've seen that works in this case. If you really cannot do it on a video call, is one, you craft a very good email, and then you ask if there are any questions, but you don't do it in the same email. Like if you do it in the same email, a lot of times it happens, or like you do it in the same email, but also you do it in a separate one. Because a lot of times what happens is that you do it in the same email and I read the email and it looks clear to me. And at that moment, I don't have many questions. And then tomorrow I start working on it. And then I realize that actually I have 2 or 3 questions. And usually I've seen that sending the email like a little bit later, or asking, or maybe even just a phone call a couple of days after, like, how is it going? Just wondering if you had any questions. Sometimes it helps. Yeah. And then I'm going to Desiree's question. Like at some point you mentioned like calls where there are 50 people, 50 people in. Like one thing which I've seen in general is that you don't need many people face to face, but having a little bit helps. And by this, let me explain. Imagine, for example, that there were 50 people in this call, but only 4 with the video on or asking questions, and the other 46, let's say, in background mode. That would probably be quite enough for me to get enough feedback to guess what the other 46 people questions are, understanding is, and so on. Because the likelihood is that if those people have a question, probably either Tom, Rose, or Dave would probably have the same question, or at least be raising their eyebrow. So sometimes, like, if you need to delegate something to a lot of people, but you cannot get all those people on an email, like on a call, and you need to send an email, for example, what helps is that you get the email read by a colleague of yours, and you just ask them like, what questions come up? That already is not ideal, but that already gets you like quite in a better position that if you didn't do it. Yeah. Great. Yeah, another thing that really helps in this, if you need to delegate, even just via email, is to ask what other people think could be the most likely failure point. So usually what I used to do myself was, for example, like if I'm delegating a small project, to ask the person what do they think could be the most likely way in which the project fails. So first of all, I ask it myself, and I try to address this in the email, and then I ask the other person. Or maybe if I think that the main risk is that we miss a deadline, I would ask, what do you think would be the number one reason why we might miss the deadline? And this kind of questions, like, again, is another really good thing, which you want to do, especially if you're working remotely. Why? Because if you're in an office and there is a problem, someone can just swing by your office, knock the door, and say, look, we might have this problem. The likelihood, or maybe you bump with them on the coffee machine or something like that. The likelihood that this happens working remotely are lower, and the likelihood that it happens later than it would have been reasonable are higher as well. And so that's why it helps to like try to preempt failure, try to ask, to be a bit more proactive in asking people, is there any problem? What do you think the most likely problem is? And so on. Then, of course, you need to have a track record that when you ask this question is not a trick question. So it's not something like the person answers with the risk, and then you're like, oh, you're an idiot, you should have done that. Like, if you do that, people will not answer those questions to you anymore, and you're not in a good position. But if you have a track record of being helpful with those questions and constructive when people bring up problems, then that's something that helps, and it helps to do it a bit more proactively when working remotely than you would do otherwise. Yeah. Any questions on this?
I had a comment.
Yeah.
I know I'm supposed to be hosting, but just a comment. So if I've understood you correctly, your examples and Tom's example and Desiree's examples are from an employee perspective. You know, asking questions, you're setting it up so that it's comfortable for them to ask questions. But what about if the leader might have a tasking, a project, and it's not really clear, you know something, and you kind of have an idea of what direction to go in, but you actually want to talk it through. And so it's for benefit of you as well, because I know when I was working full time, I always didn't assume I knew everything. I knew something. So just to have that quick chat, so it doesn't necessarily have to be video, could be on the phone. You know, here are some initial thoughts. So it actually helps the leader as well, just to clarify. And of course that might happen later on, when not necessarily mistake, but something comes up, some questions, it actually might change the direction of the project. So what do you have any research or any advice on that?
No, I totally agree. This is the other problem that happens with remote work, is that the leaders know much less what's going on, what are the problems of their people, how their people are spending their time, which I don't mean it from like how people are spending their time, like then people are lazy and they don't work. But I mean it that there is some task that you want people to prioritize. You know that some task should take, I don't know, should take 2 hours, not 10 minutes, not a full day. And it's much easier to know those things when you're in the office and you see people working and you can swing by their workstation and whatnot. It's much harder to do it when online.
Mhm.
And so I totally agree. That helps the leader to talk. One question which I've seen that helps a lot, like I have a client, he's the CEO of 3 very small businesses, like very small size businesses, and they're all managed fully remotely. And the best exercise, like let's call it exercise, like that we've done that improved some of those businesses was simply asking his people what their daily schedule is, like their weekly schedule. And he discovered so much. He discovered that they're spending like hours on tasks that you would like them to spend only 10 minutes, not because they're slow, but just because you don't need to do it at this high level of detail that they were doing it. And then maybe there was another task that like he didn't even care about, and he discovered that his people were spending a lot of time on. And maybe there was another thing that he thought that his people are spending time on, but they're not. And then, of course, I don't mean that everything should like follow what the leader's model was. What I mean is that by looking at disconnects between what you thought that your people's schedule was and what it actually is, you might discover that there are problems that your people have that you didn't know. You might discover that there are important things that your people do that you didn't know that they were doing. And all those things. So this, for example, is an excellent exercise. And if you don't do this exercise, just talking with your people, what you've been working on, what were the key problems, that helps bring a lot of information to the leader. Yeah.
That's a very practical tool. What's a good one?
Yeah. And then the second part of today's talk was supposed to be about like the needs of the people. And part of my work is that sometimes I'm hired by companies. I'm sometimes, like, one of the most common engagement is the company changes the CEO, and then the CEO hires me to talk to their employees and try to understand what are the concerns, the problems, what do they would like, and so on. And one of the things that comes up a lot more commonly than a lot of people would think about is people that say, I would like my boss to know the difficulties of my job. Doesn't necessarily mean like I would like my boss to pay me more because my job is difficult. Like, of course they would like to, but it's not the main point. It's not necessarily like my work should be completely easy. It's not necessary. It's just I would like my boss to know the difficulties that I'm doing and that I'm working hard on those, and a lot of times, like, people don't know about it. And like having these kind of conversations, as you suggested, and asking, what have you been spending time on? What problems are you facing on your job? Which tasks? This is one of my favorite questions. Which tasks do you spend more time on than you think would be reasonable? Or that is producing you more frustration than you think is reasonable? Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Dave,
thought, yeah, yes.
go ahead, Dave.
I'm trying to look underneath the give and take of leader worker at work itself. And there are systems, some better than others, where you can track the work as it comes out through different people and through technology. And it seems to me that we need much better ways to keep work tracked and very visible as it's being contributed to by individuals or groups. So it comes up, and not just on the dashboard of the senior people, but basically it's visible to everyone. I think artificial intelligence could help with that, because if you lose track of the combined efforts and what the work was building, whether it's a product or changing a service or whatever, then we're just focusing on how well we communicate and what we learn, and we're missing the reason we're being employed. The work, that's what comes out to the customer. So how do we keep that? When I used to consult on a shop floor, I could see what was coming through the system and dropping into the shipping bed. It's very concrete, and people could walk up and down and they hear it. They hear the work being done, but they could see the results, and then we'd have.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I think this is a very important point that you're making, because remotely, indeed, we don't see the work, like we only see a portion of it, unless there is a deliberate effort to showing like the full piece of work. Like, I've talked with a few people which do remote work, which paradoxically they almost don't know even what the company is doing other than their own single work stream.
That's right.
And if they're in some like support function, not working directly on the product, they almost don't even care about what's the product, and that can be problematic.
Very much so, and really would go against everything that we took years to build up in regard to concern for the customer and value that we're producing, and having a shared concern. And took years and years and years to get particularly the folks who were being paid by the hour to really care about that. And as long as they're doing their piece of work, that seemed to be enough. Now it sounds like we've been forced back to a kind of piecework again.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a thing before we hear about Basir. On this, I have a story from a client of mine. I did some work for a company that produces some consumer product, and some of the people working there, they were lamenting that they weren't getting much feedback on the product. Like, of course, you know that the product is a success because you're seeing the numbers, the sales, but that doesn't really mean much. Like, and so on. And what we did is that we went to a shop, and then we talked to some of the clients buying the product. And there was one client that told us how life-changing was the product for her. And she just told a brief story of the impact it made on her life, because like something that you would never have guessed. Like for me, it was a product like many others. And then she told the story of the difference that the product made. And so we asked them, like, can we record you? And she said, yes, of course. And we recorded her 45 second story. And then we brought it back to the people working in the company, not only the people working on product, but the people working at anything in the company. And we showed them that story. And some of them were crying. There were people in accounting that for the first time in their career, they saw the difference that their work was making. They thought that they were just handling numbers. Like they thought that the only person that their work was making a difference to was their boss or shareholder. And they finally saw that. And that was like, I'm probably not using the word lightly, life-changing. And this is what like people should do more, like find out the customer, whether it's external customer or whether it's internal customer, record a story and show it. And yeah, and on this, I just give another example to solidify this understanding. I used to work for a big Fortune 50 company. I loved my job, but being a Fortune 50, there were some moments of the job which were very bureaucratic. And I never understood why, when we signed a client, I hate to get the client through so much paperwork. And I was like, that's becoming a problem for me because it takes away time from my job and so on and so on. And then one day, there is one of our lawyers from the headquarters that came to our office for some training. And I happened to be talking to her at the coffee machine. And I asked her, why do we need to sign all this paperwork? It's unnecessary, right? And then she explained to me what happens if one day I skip some of the paperwork. And she explains to me, like that paperwork, which I thought was frustrating because it took probably between 20 and 40 minutes of my time. She told me how many days of work it would add to her work if there is some problem downstream from that. And she actually told me how much overtime she does when someone else, like not me, because even though I disliked it, I always got to the paperwork. But there were some clients, some colleagues of mine, which were skipping some parts sometimes, and how much time she worked overtime because of that. And the consequences on her life for working overtime, like that she doesn't get to see her daughter the day that she came home late, and it's the grandparents that took care of and something like that. And from that moment, the task which was frustrating wasn't frustrating anymore. It was still tedious, but it wasn't frustrating anymore. And that made a lot of difference on my quality of job. And so these are the things which are so important to improve the qualities of one's work. And companies should, and it doesn't take long. Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry. Yeah.
Basir had a question.
Yeah, Vasir had a question.
Yeah,
sorry.
Luca, great presentation. I wish I've come across you 15 years ago. So,
Yeah.
but still, even now, it's good. So my question is collaboration in online communities, especially when you're doing, projects not for profit, and a lot of the times you have people who put in a lot of work versus people who are just there, almost ready to snatch and run, like pickpockets. So the free rider, the freeloader, how do you solve that problem by getting people into a consensus? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vasir. So this is interesting because actually, before joining the corporate world, while I was still a student, I worked for a nonprofit, and 1 year I actually was I happened to lead it, and it was a very interesting because we had about like 50 people, and the interesting thing was that those 50 people were all volunteers. So not only it was a nonprofit, but everyone was a volunteer. So you cannot fire them, you cannot like promote them, like I mean, you cannot give them raises or so on. So that's quite interesting. Like, how do you avoid free riders problems? How do you make sure that people do, even though they have no tangible result? And the thing is that turns out is that a lot of people do work for recognition and for impact. Then, of course, like in work, like, of course, you also need to have a salary because at the end of the day, you need to pay bills and whatnot. But as long as you get enough salary, after that, like all the motivation like 90% of the motivation comes from impact, and not only impact and recognition, but fairness in impact and recognition. And this is in my eyes, the number one thing that everyone working in a nonprofit, let's say, environment should focus on: fairness of recognition. So what does it mean? It means that since it's a volunteering environment, everyone will contribute to different levels. You cannot expect, like in a company, you want everyone to contribute to the same level, or at least to the same base level. In a non-profit, usually you cannot really do that. Instead, you need to adapt to the reality that people will have different levels of contribution. And then what you need to do is to adapt your recognition and the responsibility you give to people and the status and visibility and whatnot to their contribution that they give, and that needs to happen fairly. So how do you do that? Number one is you need to have some clear ladder of recognition. Ladder, I mean something along the lines of, you do this, it's okay, and this is what you can expect. You do this, that's great, and this is what you're going to expect. You do that, that's fantastic, and you will get this. What you mean here, where you get is, of course, not contribution, but it's recognition, visibility, responsibility, credit, attention, and so on. And the tricky thing is that once you define that, or even if you don't define it explicitly, you need to be 100% adamant in upholding that and in getting other people to uphold that. Because the problem will come when there is a person which contributes here and somehow gets to this level of status or recognition. And that will immediately create a lot of problems. Now, the thing is that everything I've said right now kind of makes sense. But when you get to do it, it's then hard. And the reason why it's hard is because the person that does this, if they have the expectation to get this, it would be extremely hard to tell them no. you did this and you get this. And the reason is because, especially if it's a nonprofit, they will be well-meaning. Maybe they put a lot of time, even if the time didn't necessarily produce a very big contribution. And so you will feel bad to tell them, like, I'm sorry, I know that you showed up a lot, but all you've said was like, you didn't really do much actual work, so you cannot expect much. Like, it's a very hard conversation to have. And most people don't want to have it, especially if you're in a nonprofit and you're doing that also because of the fraternal spirit and you don't want to create problems and so on. But why does this conversation happen? This conversation happened because upstream of that, there was someone who thought that their contribution was here, even though they did this. And so the key is to make extremely clear of what are the steps of the ladder of contribution, so that it never happens that someone thinks that they are contributing at a higher level of what they're actually contributing. And I think that this is the one key that if you nail it, you will solve a lot of problems downstreams. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been very helpful.
No, thank you for the question. It's very important, and it's something that we should really talk more about it. Yeah.
So Luca, an observation, you were, on paper, you were to come and talk about remote work, but I'm struck by something you said at the very beginning, and I'm not sure if everybody was here. You're really interested in human behavior, and many of the examples you've given are about human behavior, whether it's remote, like we did touch upon a couple of topics were remote or hybrid. It's really tackling that human behavior, irrespective of where or how you're working. So is that a finding of yours that, in all your work with, you're giving your advice on hybrid work or telework or remote work?
Yeah, totally. Because at the end, like what you're dealing with are people. And I see a lot of places where you have a process, the process looks fantastic, no one does it. Or you have a process, the process looks fantastic, but people are doing it like a checklist, and they're doing everything super superficially, and the checklist is done, you think that you did the process, but the process yielded nothing, or yielded very bad quality thing. And it's really all about the human element is just so centric to the manager's experience. And like this, like my nonprofit experience really shaped me, because I've seen that every time, like, of course, like compensation is important. Of course, KPIs are important. Of course, authority and hierarchies are important. But the moment you have to leverage them, or you rely on them, you cannot get good output, or at least over a long time, or you will not do it unless people already cared very much for their own reasons about the thing that you're doing. And the big question will be, let's imagine that your title means zero. Let's imagine that the people are not getting a salary from this company. How else will you get them to care? Because if you don't do that, they will not care anyway. They will do their job as going to a checklist and doing the bare minimum and nothing else. And so that other part is basically a lot. It's about human behavior. It's about, yeah.
In a way, what we teachers, which is what I've been my whole life, have to redouble our efforts to help individuals understand the importance of the reputation they earn by virtue of what they do, the satisfaction that they earn by virtue of what they do, a lot more internals.
I just want to answer to you first before I've seen also Tom and Basir have raised their hand.
And maybe, Luca, after that, we could check in with Desiree. I just want to make sure that, so after you speak.
Oh,
with
sorry.
Desiree. Yeah. She didn't put up her hand. I just wanted to check
Okay.
to make sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, so just because otherwise I will forget what, like, all to answer all the points by from Dave. I think that Dave, you raised a good point when you talked about reputation. Once, so this is extremely important for two reasons. Like, one thing is, I could teach a person, for example, the perfect way to delegate. And then two managers might delegate the same task exactly the same way, the perfect way, and one manager might get excellent outcomes and the other manager might get terrible outcomes, even if they did exactly the same thing. What's the difference? The difference is the track record of the manager. For example, let's say that during delegation, you say this thing has to get done by the 1st of May. How people respond to it depends on your track record with deadlines. If you have a track record that you don't care if people go over the deadline, people will not take it seriously.
That's right.
And so on. So at least half of management is about building a track record that when you say something, you mean it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you will not. And this particularly applies to core values. For example, like companies have all this thing about core values and they do it the checklist way. The checklist way, I mean, they think that they hire some consultant, they come up with some compelling list of core values, they write some good statement, they put it on some posters, they do a CEO presentation, and that's what drive it. Doesn't drive anything.
Nothing.
What drives the track record? Why? Because every core value, it's always a short-term cost. If you think about it, every single core value is a short-term cost. Sustainability is a short-term cost. It means we're going to do things a bit more expensive. Respect for people, it's a short-term cost. It means we will have to fire that person which is completely disrespectful, even if they are quite good at their job. Safety is a short-term cost. It means even if you are behind in production, you need to take the 30 seconds to wear your safety helmet when you go on the production. Now, the thing is, when you make your super nice HR-driven presentation on core values, at the back of the mind of everyone in the audience will be, does my company expect me to do it only when it's easy, or also when it's hard and expensive?
Mm-hmm.
And you can only demonstrate this by taking action and creating a track record. So for example, let's say that you decide that safety is the new core value of your company. And you go around telling people that they should wear their personal protective equipment. They will still not do it. Or they will do it only when there is time, will not do it when you say that we're behind production. Because they don't trust that if they do it, you will not tell them then that they lost production time. What will change the situation is if you have the track record of doing the opposite. If you have the track record that you work on the production floor and you see someone not wearing the helmet and you tell them that they should wear the helmet. If you create the track record that you yourself take some of your extremely valuable time to wear the personal protective floor helmets. The track record is what changes culture. I have this saying that culture is the track record. And if you want to change the culture, you need to change the track record.
Yeah.
And then Dave mentioned teachers. Teachers is the same thing. Teachers need to build a track record that listening to them will be useful. Teachers need to build a track record that if someone asks a question, they will be replied to in a way that is useful. And so on. Trainings are the same thing. Dave and Tom correctly said like we are wasting billions in training. That's because we are doing trainings as a checklist.
Yeah.
We hire
exactly.
someone, he has a curriculum, he goes in front of the class of the audience, He goes through the curriculum. He asks if there is any questions. No one raises the hand. Fantastic, I've done my job. The money was well spent, but then you don't get any results.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
Instead, yeah.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
No,
thought-
instead you need to create like again a track record. So for example, what I'm teaching people is to train people using hypotheticals. So what is hypothetical? Hypothetical means, so for example, let's say that I'm going to, I actually teach every year a few universities. I teach some modules, and one of the modules I teach is risk management for plant safety officers. I don't do a single minute of theory, almost like less than 10% of the course. 90% is this is going to be a situation you will face in your job. What do you do? And then they tell me what they will do, and then I give them feedback. This is a good idea because, and this is a bad idea because. And not only is more engaging, but more importantly, it's more effective because they see what the problem is, they know that the problem will happen to them, so it feels more relevant. We solve problems which will happen in real life, which are very different from the problems that we talk about in a normal curriculum. And this is, for example, how a lot of teaching and training should happen.
Before I get to you, Basir and Tom, Desiree, you asked a question a little while ago. Did you have any comments, questions? Is this changing your view on, hybrid work or telework or whatever you want to call it, remote work?
Or are you disappointed because you're not hearing something you were hoping to hear that we can see?
I've because I've worked both, full-time in an office and in a manufacturing facility back in, as I like to say, when Jesus was a boy, and I used to work as an engineer. So I worked I worked in a manufacturing plant at that time. I've worked in offices, and once I switched roles, so to me, it really depends on the role, whether or not it makes sense for full-time, let's say on-site. I don't have any sort of philosophical objection to, let's say, hybrid work. But at a certain point in my career, I was working for this company who shall not be named, who the mandate was you needed to be in office 3 days a week. It's a blanket mandate. And if you couldn't manage that, then obviously you lose your job. And certain people, switch roles as a result of that. Here was the challenge. I lived in one state. My boss lived in another state. The people who worked for me lived in another state. I was going into an office by myself. So there was really no justifiable reason for me to go to the office 3 days a week when I was still, and it goes back to what I was saying before, I was still on the phone. I was still talking to people on the phone. But there's no real rhyme or reason other than somebody wanting to see faces for me to be back in the office, because it doesn't change the work that I did. What will have to happen now, because what happened after COVID is the work increased. We're working from home. The work increased. So now that you're calling me back to the office and I now have a 2-hour commute each way, are you going to reduce the work back to pre-COVID levels?
But I think the design challenge is what would make that 2-hour drive, at least when you do come, and the time you're there, really, really worthwhile. And there's some creative things that can be done to make that sacrifice to get there worth it, but certainly not business as usual. Settling down and doing what you would have done at home. And I think this is for managerial leaders. This is, to me, a very new challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
back to you, Luca, and then we have Tom and Basir.
How do we, and how do we make that office a place that people, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think from this story, like reminds me of one of the things that I advise companies to do. Like, there is Google Smart, don't be evil. Like for me, it's don't be absurd. And by don't be absurd, I mean that there are a lot of things which you're doing which seems absurd to your company. To your employees. Hopefully, they are. So if they are absurd objectively, of course you shouldn't be doing them at all, because they are one of the biggest motivational breakers that are out there. Asking your people to do things which are absurd. The same thing applies to things which feel absurd. Those are one of the biggest motivational breakers. In the example before, like having to sign contracts, all the paperwork, it felt absurd, wasn't absurd, but as long as it felt absurd, it was draining my motivation. And one of the things I advise is for companies to review everything which feels absurd to their people and either remove it or give them a very good explanation for why it's not absurd. Or as they've suggested with the commute, like make it not absurd by putting a good reason why you're requiring the commute.
I guess my question is, I'm asking myself, what's our takeaways from the discussion? Great discussion, as usual. Luke, I'm so glad that you're here. In my mind, I'm hoping you find a home and we see more of you and we can be more helpful to you with this group that we have. But I was just trying. Let me just say what I'm thinking of as the takeaways, and then maybe some people see more. You could help me be clear. One is I love the way you introduced we've had 1,500 years of working together side by side, and only between 15 months and 15 years of working remotely, depending on your circumstances, and we just are bad at it. We're not aware, and we don't prioritize, and we haven't habitualized or normalized the things that will make some of those things work. That's the one takeaway. The second is a lot of what we're talking about, whether we're together or we're remote, if we're very mindful about training or delegating or things like that, we will do it well in proximity. But when we're in proximity, we fool ourselves. We had the event, it happened, we think it was great because people had a nice experience and we all got ice cream, but we may not have met the goals or the intentions that the why of those events. And remote work strips away that comfort of proximity and requires that we be more careful. But we should be more careful anyway, or more intentional anyway. And the last one is kind of this idea of, I don't know how to say it exactly, but balancing the strategies we use with the communication challenge that we have. And the idea that, Nora Bateson, who was a guest a while back, talks about warm data versus cold data. The more concrete and things are, the easier they are to deal with remotely. And the more abstract or fuzzy things are, the more communication and attention that they need. And so, and I tend to think of things in three big categories of work, but the work part, getting things done, takes up most of our time, most of our attention, and that actually fits remote work the best. Knowledge transfer, especially new ideas and trying to create coherence, is not so easy, not so mechanical, and requires better ways to connect with, or more conscious ways to connect with one another. So it's even a bigger challenge remotely. And sometimes that happens because if you're together, you can whiteboard stuff and do it on the napkin, and it happens more naturally than we've grown used to. And part of that is tools are still emerging, but even the tools that are there, we haven't adopted them and integrated them yet. And the last one is the kind of the human element, the building trust, building knowledge, being able to read people's social IQ, empathy, compassion, that opens up real communication and problem solving. That's harder. It's easier to do, casually and serendipitously when you're working with someone, or the after did work, or the break conversations and things like that. But those personal conversations can still happen. We just need to be much better about making them, those tiny conversations, a priority, and noticing when we're missing them, because we don't even notice them in the traditional world, the conventional world, and we sure do miss them in the remote world. So the solution isn't to do away with remote work. The solution is to figure out how to make that more a normal part of our experience. Those are my takeaways.
Great
Thank you,
summary.
Tom. Yeah. Thank you, Tom. I wanted to add just one on top of that, which is what came out from the discussion from Basir's question, which was this focus on fairness, and especially focus on being perceived as fair. Because I know plenty of managers which are kind of fair, but they are not perceived as fair, and that makes the fairness not matter. And I make an example which has nothing to do with management, it has to do with the police. I hear that in the US, the policemen like to get donuts. In Italy, they like to get croissant. The difference is that it's understanding that in the US, there are a lot of parking spots. So when the policemen go to buy the croissant, the donut, they can park properly. In Italy, we lack parking places. So when the policemen go into the croissant, they always park double-sided on the sidewall. And for 34 years of my life, I thought that it's unfair. I was thinking like they're supposed to uphold a good citizens' behavior, and they act fairly, they act badly. They do this, which is unfair because if I do it, I get a fine, but they don't get any fine, and so on. And then 3 months ago, I discovered that there's a good reason why they're doing it. And the reason is because the policemen are always on call, and they need to be able to reach the car in less than 10 seconds. And that's why they park it like that. But understanding that made me completely change the view of the police from unfair, arbitrary, whatnot. They were just doing their good job. And a lot of that happens with management. Like there are plenty of managers which take good decisions, fair decisions, but they don't explain why. And because of that, they're perceived as unfair, and the unfairness breaks the motivation of their people. And just explain more. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but not just explaining more, give permission for people to have the conversation when they're perceiving something, but also build the skills.
Yes, as well.
In the leaders that should be everywhere in the organization to help people recognize when they see a signal, how they're telling a story about it, and that there's another way to see that story, right? But the boss shouldn't necessarily bear the burden of helping people think through that. Everybody should bear the burden of helping each other.
Exactly. On this, I just recorded a podcast episode with Blake Janova, the CEO of Janova Inc. And one thing that I told him was that as now he's scaling, his company is scaling fast, and he was saying like, what do I do to keep the culture and the care about inside the company as it scales? He asked me. And my answer was, one thing you should do, not all the time because you don't have the time, but sometime, like once a week, is to explain your decisions. And not explain like just the motivation, but like explain like which core values, which key results you were trying to obtain, why you did that. Not only because it makes the decision feel more fair, but because you're also teaching your people how to think. And once people understand how to think, they will be able to apply it to scale. And then I told him one more thing, which connects to what Dave just said. When you explain to people why you took a decision, also tell them that you are explaining to them so that they understand and that you expect them to do the same. Because only when a leader expects their own subordinate, which are leaders themselves, to explain their own decisions, that's when the culture trickles down the company.
Good point.
And probably along with that is to help people appreciate that sometimes the right decision isn't clear.
Yes, yeah, as
we
well.
need
Like
a
some-
decision so we can take action, but it's not a perfect. It's not we don't have perfect information about the past or the present, let alone the future. And so all we can do, to your point, I think about based on these information that we have or what we believe to be true and what is most important to us, our values and our principles, this is the decision we're going to.
Yeah, exactly. So my problem with how some companies talk about people growth is that, again, they do it the checklist way. They have some career ladders, they have some career paths, they maybe have some training programs and so on, and they put it there. And then what happens is that you only have the most motivated employees who use them. And a lot of the other employees are left with something which is theoretically actionable, but doesn't feel actionable, and therefore doesn't get taken action on. And one of the things that I tell people to do more is to provide something actionable for every one of your people to grow a little bit their ladder of contribution. So everyone in your company, and you should do it one by one, you cannot do this at scale. You need to do it one by one, is give them one thing that feels actionable, like they feel like they can do it, and which is not trivial. So it's something that if they do it, it does have a tangible impact, even if it's small, and get them to do it. Put them in the condition to do it. And when they do it, acknowledge that they did it, and you will find yourself with a much more motivated and engaged employee than you had before. It doesn't work with everyone because you will always have a few people here and there which are like almost immune to any kind of this, but it works most of the time on most of the people. And I think that by not doing it, companies are leaving a lot on the table, not just on the talent, but also on the engagement, because at the end of the day, most of us want to contribute. Maybe we don't want to work more than 8 hours, but in those 8 hours, we want to do something meaningful. We want to do something that contributes. And we often don't know how to do it. And we need someone to tell us, look, this is the one thing you can do that will increase your contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these little micro conversations, I'll call them. I love this, but to me, it's another example of where our concept of leadership needs to move from these positions of authority, because there's no way that a manager is going to have those conversations with 10 people or 50 people or 700 people. So those types of habits and those skills to have those small conversations need to be, created in everyone in the organization that is leading work. That leadership, we have this saying that we want leading to be clear and leaders to be common. So they should be everywhere. I love this idea, and I just see it as an example of the consequence of our needing to change the attention that we're giving to this part of the work.
I mean, yeah, I think that up to 10 people, it's relatively feasible for leaders to have one such conversation a month. I think like most people can do it, like with their direct reports, if they don't have more than 10. If they have more than 10, I would argue that that's a problem in the structure that needs to be addressed somehow. But that's another thing. But yeah, and on this, like, a lot of times people don't think that it's possible. Like they think all of this sounds right, but can I really do it in my when I get back to my work? Do I really have the time to do it? And to this, I've seen two situations. So one was when I used to work for this Fortune 50 company. I was working in their consulting business. Like they were an manufacturing business, chemical business, but they also had a chemical division, a consulting division. I was in the consulting division, and sometimes we would have a client which was stubborn. And they were saying something like, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I just don't think that it's possible. And then we will take the leaders of the client to our own manufacturing plant. They visit it for a couple of hours, and they actually see that it's possible. And they go back, and now they do it. And it turns out, yeah, it actually was possible. Because it does seem like you didn't have any hours left of your time. But if I came to you with one more task, work-related task, you would have found that 1 hour for that. And the moment that you do those 1 hour conversation, like that you do those one-on-ones with your people, and you get them to be more engaged, more proactive, suddenly you will have much more time to do more other things. Yeah. That said, what do I do now? Because now I don't have a company where to get my clients to visit. So I usually try to shrink the scope of change. So I'm telling, for example, let's say I'm consulting a senior leader called Jack. I will tell him, Jack, we agree, like right now, you have 12 reports, and you don't have the time to do those conversations with your 12 reports once a month. Pick one report and have one such conversation 1 hour a month with him. He does it once a month, 2 months, 3 months. He sees the effect that he's producing, and damn sure he's gonna find the time to do it with most other people. So a lot of times it's about shrinking the scope of change so that it becomes manageable. People get started with it. They see the good outcomes that come. They see that it's worth it. And then they automatically expand it by themselves to the rest of the work.
So Luca, we have 25 minutes. Dave has a question, just to let you know where we are.
Yeah.
Maybe leave some time at the end because so many topics were covered here, and maybe just to have a wrap-up conversation about that. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I hear words like contribution and see the outcomes, see the effects of these various interventions. It still comes back to my rant, which is we need to have a way of making clear what happens in the way of results, in the way of changes. We talk a lot about change, but change usually happens in very small increments. But if it's not noticed, it's not really good for anyone. So we need managerial leaders who, A, are part of making the storyboard visible to everyone and continuing updating it, and B, developing ways that, as to Tom's point, that people can recognize with each other how they're doing according to the story that they're trying to write in the future.
Thank you, Dave. I like, especially when you pointed out like the importance of people helping each other see their progress and their contribution. Like this is something like so important. And I'll give an example, like, so sometimes I go, when I'm writing a book, I go write it at my local Starbucks. And imagine that I took a 1 minute video of the part of the Starbucks where you have all the baristas that are preparing the drinks and you have the cashier. And then I asked someone to list all the contributions that the baristas made during those 60 seconds.
That's a great idea.
What would you list? Like you would have some managers who would say like, prepare the, I don't know, 7 coffees. If that's the contribution that you list, what you will get will be maybe a higher number of coffees per minute. Quality of the coffees, we won't really care much. And the people will be engaged I don't know, do you really get engaged by producing a high number of coffees? I'm not sure. Another person might point out at the quality of the coffees. Like they would see like, oh, that flat white had a nice swan made on it, like with the latte heart, and so on. That comments, if you list those contributions, you will get more of that. Third level, the person would not like just list the contribution looking at the work, but it will look at the interactions with the
teamwork.
customers.
It's almost like a dance.
Exactly. Level 3 would be with the customers, like the reactions of the people. Like you will say like, look, that person smiled when they see the coffee handed to them. That person smiled when you saw the person calling their name. And that's the level at which you will start getting work which is engaging and fulfilling, because people see the effect that the work we're doing. They're not just making coffee. They're not just doing a process, which was the first step. They're not just making good coffee, which was the second step. Now they're making customers happy. And that's fulfilling. But then there is the fourth step, which is what you were pointing, Dave, which is that you also highlight the interactions between the people. You're highlighting the moment that a barista helped another barista. You highlight the moment that a barista notices that the other barista, whose specialty maybe is flat white, did a great flat white. And that's the moment where the work not only becomes fulfilling, but you also get the team spirit, and you get the fact that you are not just working for a customer, but also like you get the team spirit. You get people that are seeing that not only they're doing an impact on themselves with the salary that they earn, on the company with the production, which was the second level, on the customer, which is the third level, but also on the teammates, which is the first level. And that's what opens up to all the interactions, which you correctly pointed out, they're necessary. And Tom correctly pointed out, since the manager has a low bandwidth, we cannot let the manager have all the work of pointing out to the good contribution. You need to have the people pointing out to themselves. But how do you get them to do that? You get them by doing this exercise. Now, of course, this exercise, even though you can do it technically by doing it, as I said, recording and then during the onboarding, showing to people, look at all the contributions, but ideally you would do it on the job.
Yeah.
Like the manager will come out and will point out to would observe for 1 minute the work, and then will call out for 1 second, like everyone style, like team out style, like in basketball, like everyone comes in, and then the manager says what he saws in 1 minute. And he says, for example, I liked that Mary did a perfect art on the swan art on the coffee. Have you seen the smile on the customer? I've seen how Alex helped our new trainee John operated that machine. I've seen this, I've seen that. Stop stalking. You immediately raised the level 1 of the engagement. 2, you clarified the ladder of contribution. 3, you give to everyone an idea of one actionable thing they can do right now in that shift to improve their contribution. And then hopefully, after you did that, you will stick around, observe for the next 10 minutes. Maybe you can go do something else, then you come back after 10 minutes. And then again, you call a second timeout. You notice the new contribution that people are doing that they weren't doing before the timeout. And bam, that's the moment where people see that it took just that little to make a difference to them, to others, a difference to clients, a difference to their teammates, and a difference to themselves. Because those 10 minutes they just had were probably the best 10 minutes of work they had in the last year.
Yeah,
That's
so
great.
standing
I love
ovation
it.
for that, Luca. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Starbucks now.
How do you, well, besides he lives in Turin and he's going to Starbucks, we won't go there. But how does that relate to remote work? Because how can you make that story visible to people who you can't take into the...
Yeah, so one thing you can, like, you should create moments in which you can see what people are doing so that then you can call it out. So what I will do, for example, if I have a fully remote team, will be today, I take my little notepad and I write down everything I see positive, which could be, I check the Slack channel, for example. Is there anyone which did a positive contribution in the Slack channel? I note it down. I join a sales call with a customer, or I join a customer onboarding, or whatever is relevant. Does my salesperson or customer service support does anything like positive contribution? I note it down. Maybe I join a meeting, a project meeting call. Does anyone make a positive contribution to that? I note it down. Maybe I have the one-on-one. Does my report with which I'm having the one-on-one say anything or did anything recently which was a good contribution? Even just they ask a good question. They give me a piece of feedback. I note it down. End of the day, we do a 15 minutes Zoom call with the whole team. And in that 15 minutes, I read my notepad. And I said, these are all the good things I've seen. I want you to know that, like, and what the message you want to say is, I want you to know that I noticed, and I want you to see the difference that you're making. But you cannot say it explicitly. What you say is that as you go through the lines, you show that they've been noticed, of course, because you're saying it, and you're showing the positive contribution. For example, you said, I've seen Alex asked, while he was onboarding the customer, he did that one thing which was great for the customer. John, during the one-on-one, he asked me this question, which was great because he let me understand that I'm not clear when I'm explaining this thing. And you go through this list for 15 minutes, and then you say, thank you everyone for this good work, looking to see more than next week. And that's how you do it in a remote setting.
So Luca, lots of things discussed today. We seem to cover so many things. The touch point, I guess, was the remote work. What's next for you? You have I loved your stories. For me, that was what I will remember. Your storytelling around everyday leadership or employee challenges. And yeah, you've written 9 books. I'm sure the stories are there. But what's next for you in terms of because you do more than remote work around human behavior, your kind of work. What are you thinking about? What's keeping you engaged in this? It's in this world.
Yeah, so the 2 big things, like one for me is now in 2 weeks I will publish a new book, which is called Winning Long-Term Games, which is all about the idea that there is a difference between like every one of us thinks that they are long-term players because we all have long-term objectives. I don't know, I want to get rich, I want to have a good, great family, want to retire happily. The difference is that some of us are playing the long game and some of us are playing short-term games. And by what I mean by that is that short-term games means you're having a lot of interactions with people and you're trying to get the most out of that interaction. Or you're working on a sale and you're trying to get the most out of that sale. You're working on a product and you're trying to get the most out of the product. And instead, playing the long games means that, of course, you do those short-term things. You have interactions with people, you sell stuff, but you're doing it in the context of the long term, which means that you're doing it to build assets rather than to destroy assets. I mean, I can have an interaction with a person. I can either try to get the most out of that interaction, which is the short-term way, or I can have that interactions so that the next interactions will be better, which is the long-term game, the long-term way.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like when we talk about setting conditions and getting results. So you're getting proximate results, but you're also setting conditions for the future and for others to move forward as well. Yeah,
Sounds great.
Yeah, and relating it to management, for example, there are some managers which delegate only to get one thing done, and there are managers who delegate to grow the person and to build the track record. Now, the key thing is that the first manager will have more success over the short term because his delegation is more efficient. And in the short term, you don't see the results of the long-term actions. But that growth will only bring him up to a certain level of success. And then he will stay there because he's not growing his people, for example.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
of course, you would want to do, like, it seems natural to do the other thing, but it's just so hard because while you're doing it, you see other people getting ahead
Yeah.
playing short-term games. And so you think like, I'm falling behind. I need to do the same because other people are more successful. So if I do, but then because you're not doing the long-term things, you get stuck. And you
Mhm.
don't grow after a certain point. So that's what the book is about. So that's one of the two things that I'm doing. And then the other things is, as usual, I'm doing some consulting engagement. I'm working with some companies on their management capabilities, which is how they train their people, like basically what we've talked today, and these kind of things. Yeah.
So the stories you shared with us today, all those examples, are they in your books, or you just keep it to yourself and your clients, and you share
Not
them with?
really. So this is something that I need to improve in my books, is that my books are quite deprived of storytelling.
But you're a great story I think you are. Like all these
Thank
examples,
you.
like, wow.
Thank you. But somehow I still need to improve in applying that to books. I tend to write books much like if you get it, you will see they are very short. They're information dense. Like a lot of people, they tell me that my books are have the highest highlights density, but I don't really tell stories in it. And yeah, so what you felt, for example, the Starbucks story was the first time that I'm telling it because today I
Wow.
was working at Starbucks. Like maybe the concept is the same, but sometimes I don't use a story or sometimes I use a different story. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just watching everyone. Everyone was, their eyes were lighting up when you were telling the story, because we can all relate to something like that. And how do we apply that to our work context,
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, this is something I see I really see sometimes people like walking out with like understanding. Now they finally understood like
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
important is this thing and how actionable it is. Because a lot of times we only do one of the things. We either explain why it's important or why it's actionable. But then if people only feel it's important, then they don't do it because they don't know what's the next step, or
Yeah.
because the next step would take too long. Or some other things we give them the next step, but we don't explain to them why it's important, and then it goes like way low in their list of priority. Yeah.
But I think we've kind of gotten away from that focus on the individual behaving human and what can be done to help that person gain in the job. And you're bringing that attention back. And I think Tom and the Prometheus folks and Rose are doing the same. We can't lose the sight of how important it is to a person to grow in the job. That's really what, and particularly the new generation that's coming on, they'll have very little patience if they aren't feeling like they're able to grow on the job. So good work, Luca.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Luca. Great. I loved it. I loved your stories, and it's hard to be quiet when you're the host, Tom. I had so many things
You
to
did a
add.
good job, Rose.
Yeah, congratulations on Rose's
Yes.
first hosting job too.
Yes, thank you.
in the Prometheus worldview, there's, who the leader is and their capacities, and it's what they do. And besides the personality pieces of who a leader is, the cognitive capabilities and the emotional capabilities, and what they do in the world, there's this idea of, well, they have knowledge, they know things that help. And we categorize them in three ways. We say that they understand the context we're in, right? They have the capacity to see a complicated or complex context or different types of contexts. And they can respond based on the possibility of the moment. So is this an entrenched situation? Is that the moment we're in? And so that we need to maybe, how do we respond if it's an entrenched situation? We don't want it to be entrenched. We want to open it. What do we do? Or is it chaotic? What do we do? And the third category, though, is can we know it helps to interact with people, to communicate, to connect? Those are skills that when we know them well, they're internalized. So they're a natural part of who we are. Well, how do we do that in the future fit world, which is in some cases totally remote, like our group right here? But even when people have this campaign to come back to the office, everybody isn't in the office. I mean, there's global teams, there's cross-organizational teams, there's business partners, there's humans that we interact with that are not in the room. So how do we do that well? What's our best practice around that? That's kind of the spark that caused me to reach out to Lucca and say, you think about this all the time. I can see you're passionate about this topic. So when someone's passionate about something, and I want to listen.
Good. Thank you,
Thank you,
Tom.
Tom.